So, for many people, they have to choose between Rolex or rent. They love luxury watches and they want one, but wanting these luxurious watches got expensive in a way collecting never used to be. Let's talk about it, and no, it's not what you think. The rent envelope. The Tudor Black Bay is the sensible first step into collecting watches, the one every buying guide points you toward first. She had a number in her head, $3,200. She had $60 moving into a separate account every payday since the raise came through, on autopilot, the kind of saving you barely notice happening. She had told herself, out loud, more than once, that she was almost there. Another 8 months, maybe 6 if a bonus landed the way it had the year before. Then, the lease renewal letter arrived. The new number wasn't a typo. $410 more a month, starting in 60 days. Take it or start apartment hunting in a market where everything else had gone up too. Not a rent hike from a landlord trying to gouge her. A market rate renewal, completely normal, completely unavoidable. She didn't cry about it. She opened the Watch Fund app, moved the balance into checking, and closed the browser tab where she had been reading about bracelet stretch on a 5-year-old Black Bay reference. 10 minutes, start to finish. That is how quietly these decisions actually happen. That is not a composite built for effect. Some version of that happened to thousands of people this year, in different cities, on different lease cycles, with different watches bookmarked. Rent does not ask whether you were saving for something. It just arrives, bigger, and whatever was sitting next to it in the budget gets pushed out first, because rent was never optional, and a watch always was. What makes this particular moment different from every other watches got expensive story you have heard before is simple. The watches are not really the problem in this version. The room they used to sit in got smaller, and it happened so gradually that most people only notice the month the math finally fails. For years, the entry-level watch story was simple enough to repeat as advice. Work a normal job, save with some discipline, and in 12 to 18 months, you would have a Tudor or a Seamaster on your wrist, and a story about how you earned it. That math worked because save with some discipline had actual room to operate in. Rent took its share. Groceries took a smaller share. Whatever was left went wherever you pointed it, and a lot of people pointed it at a watch. Because a watch felt like proof the discipline had worked. That leftover category is exactly what is being hollowed out now. And a watch was never rent. It was always leftover money wearing a nicer outfit, dressed up as a milestone, instead of admitting it was just whatever survived after everything else got paid. Quick one before we keep going. Have you ever quietly redirected a savings fund into rent or groceries without telling anyone? So, that leftover money used to be predictable. It is not anymore. And the reason has almost nothing to do with watchmaking. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The math nobody runs anymore. Since January 2020, overall consumer prices are up roughly 25%, and shelter costs have driven a large share of that climb for most of the last 6 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Groceries have moved even faster. Food at home prices have risen close to a third over that same stretch, by one detailed tracking of the government's own CPI data. Wages did not sit still either. On paper, paychecks kept climbing right alongside all of it, and by most broad measures, they roughly kept pace with inflation overall. But look specifically at wages against grocery prices, the two numbers that actually decide whether a paycheck stretches, and the gap between them has been shrinking all year. By the middle of 2026, it had narrowed to 0.4%, barely positive, trending the wrong way. That is not a cushion. That is a coin balanced on its edge. So the room where a watch fund used to live is not just smaller. It has been quietly walled off from the rest of the budget. 59% of Americans could not cover a $1,000 emergency out of savings if it landed on them tomorrow. More than half say their household finances got worse this year, the highest share recorded since anyone started tracking that particular question, back in 2001. Gallup found that inflation and high prices sit at the top of the list of financial worries for close to a third of the country, ahead of almost every other concern people were asked about. None of this eased when interest rates came down slightly. One economist watching the household side of this put it plainly: high prices stacked on top of credit card interest rates above 20% are eating middle-class budgets from two directions at once. Because people are not only paying more for groceries, they are paying interest on the debt they used to cover the gap the higher prices created. A watch fund does not survive that kind of pincer for very long. And it is not only the big line items doing the damage. Groceries used to be the place a careful shopper could find some slack. Switch brands, skip the takeout, trim the cart a little on a tight week. That slack is mostly gone. Food at home keeps climbing. Fruits and vegetables are rising faster than the average basket. The categories that used to flex now just cost more, flatly, with nowhere left to hide the difference. 52% of people now name the cost of living as their single biggest money stressor. For the youngest buyers, the exact demographic a watch brand needs to recruit if it wants a next generation of customers in 10 years, that number gets worse. Close to half say living paycheck to paycheck is their top daily concern, ahead of almost everything else on the list. None of this is unique to watch buyers specifically, and that is worth pausing on for a moment. The same squeeze is showing up in gym memberships people are quietly canceling, in vacations getting shortened or skipped, in the extra streaming subscription that finally gets cut after sitting unused for months. A watch fund is just one of the more visible casualties because it tends to be one of the larger, more deliberate ones, sitting there as a single line item instead of scattered across a dozen small ones. Nobody adds up. You can see the pullback in categories that have nothing to do with watches at all, which tells you this is not a watch problem wearing a disguise. Among people expecting their finances to get worse this year, 2 out of 3 say the first thing they are cutting is eating and drinking out. Restaurants before hobbies, hobbies before rent. Rent never moves. A watch, sitting several rungs down that ladder, does not stand much of a chance once the cutting starts. None of this is a watch statistic on its own. It is a rent statistic, a grocery statistic, a childcare statistic, a credit card statistic. But it lands on the watch industry anyway, because a Tudor was never bought with money that had nowhere else to go. It was bought with money that, for one specific month, had a little room left in it. That room is what disappeared. The watch just happens to be sitting where the disappearance is easiest to actually see. Honestly, I keep going back and forth on whether this is really a watch story at all, or whether watches are just the cleanest place to watch something much bigger happening to an entire generation's math. There is a number I want you to hold on to for later. $2,000. It comes back near the end, and it means more than it sounds like right now. An industry veteran who has sat through 3 separate downturns put it to me more bluntly than any press release ever would. The customer did not disappear because they stopped caring about watches. They disappeared because caring stopped being affordable, and no brand wanted to say that part out loud in a shareholder letter. So, if the room for a watch fund shrank, you would expect the industry to notice and adjust downward. It noticed. It just did not adjust in the direction you would expect. The filter. There is a part of this that should confuse you if you have not been tracking it closely. Rolex, Audemars Piguet, and Tudor all raised prices at the start of 2026, with average increases landing around 7%. Audemars Piguet pushed hardest on its most wanted pieces. The steel Royal Oak chronograph climbed from $40,500 to $44,400 in a single cycle, one of the steepest single-year jumps that reference has taken on. Tudor, the brand every entry-level guide points to as the sensible first move, still climbed 5 6/10% in the United States and 5 8/10% in the United Kingdom. Even the gentle sibling brand was not gentle this year. Tariffs on Swiss imports rising into the high 30s as a percentage played a real part in that. But tariffs alone do not explain why the brands leaned into the increase instead of absorbing it. At the exact moment casual buyers had the least room to say yes, the brands charged more for the yes. Read that twice, because on paper it looks like a mistake. It is not one. One analysis of the pricing environment put the mechanism plainly. Casual buyers stop buying when the cost of living rises, and that leaves only the serious collectors still transacting. That sentence is the whole hidden engine of this entire moment. The industry is not trying to hold on to the casual buyer. It has quietly stopped needing her. And the pricing decisions reflect that shift, with a kind of calm nobody in the press releases will ever admit to out loud. The secondary market backs this up with numbers that should feel contradictory, and somehow do not. The watch chart's overall index climbed more than 10% over the past year. Morgan Stanley's own tracking showed resale prices rising for 3 consecutive quarters, the first real stretch of value retention improvement since 2022. Retail prices across the luxury watch category are up roughly 7% since early last year, even as the buyer pool at the bottom keeps thinning out underneath the headline numbers. A market where casual demand is truly collapsing should not show rising resale values at the same time. Unless the casual buyer was never the one setting those values to begin with. She was the volume. The committed collector was always the price, and volume disappearing does not move the price if the price was never hers to move in the first place. There is a second, quieter effect worth naming here. As tariffs made new imports more expensive, buyers who could no longer stomach the retail markup started shifting toward domestic pre-owned inventory instead. Since a watch already inside the country avoids the import cost entirely. That should have crashed resale values by flooding the secondary market with sellers. It has not, because the people doing the shifting are still committed collectors with money, just redirecting where they spend it, not casual buyers entering for the first time. That is the actual sorting mechanism running underneath this whole story, and it is worth sitting with, because it is not cruelty, it is arithmetic, done on purpose. The industry did not make the obvious survival move and lower the floor to keep new buyers coming through the door. It did the opposite. It let the floor rise, watched fewer people clear it every quarter, and called the result resilience in the next earnings call. Part of what makes the brands comfortable letting the floor rise is that the customer base is no longer only domestic. Demand from buyers in emerging markets has grown into a real share of the pricing picture, and those buyers are, on average, less exposed to a rent increase in one specific city than the entry-level saver this story keeps circling back to. A brand does not need every market to hold steady at once. It only needs enough of them to somewhere in the world, and lately there has always been enough. Somewhere in a spreadsheet at a Swiss headquarters that reads as a win. Fewer transactions, at a higher average price, holding the same revenue line steady. Nobody in that room has to look at the $60 transfer that quietly stopped happening on an ordinary Tuesday in someone else's checking account. So watches got harder to reach, right as buyers had less to reach with. What is stranger is how calmly the whole industry has adjusted to who is left standing. The ones still walking through the door. Ask anyone working the floor at an authorized dealer what actually changed, and they will not lead with a statistic. They will describe the traffic pattern. Browsing time is up. People spend longer at the case, longer trying a piece on, longer asking questions about movement, finishing, and water resistance and lug-to-lug fit. Then, more often than before, they thank the associate and leave with nothing on their wrist. That was rare 5 years ago. A serious browser used to be a serious buyer most of the time. Now the two have quietly split apart. And then, without much warning, someone else walks in and buys the same watch outright. No financing conversation, no hesitation at the total, gone in 20 minutes. Two completely different customers, standing in the same showroom on the same afternoon, separated by exactly the gap this entire story is about. An associate who has worked the same boutique for close to a decade described it this way. 5 years ago, most people who walked in were saving towards something specific and got there eventually. Now the ones who walk in already have it, or they never will. And there is very little happening in between those two positions anymore. The middle emptied out first, and it emptied out quietly enough that nobody flagged it as a trend until the pattern had already been running for over a year. That is the showroom version of everything the spreadsheets are showing from further away. The casual saver used to be the majority of foot traffic and a meaningful share of sales. She has not vanished from the store. She still walks in, still browses, still asks good questions. She just does not buy anymore, and nobody behind the counter is surprised by that when you ask them directly. Empty middle, full top, same storefront, the new calculus. Here is where the story stops being purely bleak and starts being interesting in its own right. The people still buying are not buying the way people bought 5 years ago, and the shift shows up in the smallest details first. Case sizes are drifting back toward 36 to 40 millimeters, after roughly a decade of everything trending bigger and louder. That is not really about wrist proportions or fashion cycles. It is what happens when a purchase has to be justified rather than made on impulse. Buyers are choosing pieces they expect to still want in 15 years, not pieces built for one loud photo and a caption that ages badly. The phrase the industry itself keeps reaching for is considered purchase, a watch bought for history, for mechanical integrity, for a design that does not age out of relevance in 3 seasons. Compare that to how first watches got bought during the boom years. Fast, trend-chasing, sometimes financed on a card carrying 20% interest, often regretted within 18 months once the next trend arrived to replace it. This is not a marketing department inventing a trend to sell against. This is buyers, with less room to be wrong, refusing to be wrong on purpose. If you are one of the people who can still say yes to a 5-figure watch right now, you are increasingly someone who has already absorbed a rent increase, a grocery bill jump, and a childcare payment this same month, and still has money sitting there afterward. That is a fundamentally different profile than the buyer from 2018. And the industry has clearly noticed. Brands are leaning harder into factory visits, private appointment selling, slower relationship-based sales floors. Because the customer left standing wants a story that justifies the number, not just the number by itself. On the resale forums, the shift shows up in the listings themselves, not just the sales figures. A year ago, a typical first post from a new member read like an announcement. Just pick this up. First proper watch feels unreal. Now, a growing share of first posts from newer members read the opposite way. Need to sell fast. Moving. Any offer considered. Same forum. Different intention entirely. And nobody moderating the board had to change a single rule to notice the tone had flipped. There is also a colder read on all of this, and I think it is the more honest one. Watches priced above $40,000 are increasingly untouched by the squeeze happening underneath them. Buyers at that tier were never choosing between a Royal Oak and an electricity bill. Their household math does not run through the same categories as the buyer weighing a Tudor against a lease renewal, which means the watch market being discussed in trade reports and the watch market an ordinary working person actually touches have started describing 2 separate economies wearing the same brand names. One of them is thriving quietly. Prices climbing, resale strong, considered purchases rising steadily, appointment books full. The other is disappearing so gradually that nobody had to announce it happening. It just stopped showing up in the sales data because it stopped showing up at the counter at all. None of this required a memo or a strategy session anyone will ever admit to. It happened the way most quiet business decisions happen. 100 small choices made independently by 100 people who could no longer justify the purchase, adding up to a shift nobody planned and everybody eventually benefited from, at least on the side of the counter that still has customers. The industry did not lose a market segment by accident. It lost the segment it was never really built to protect in the first place, and every quarterly report since suggests it is entirely comfortable with that particular trade. A watch forum thread from earlier this year said it better than any brand statement ever will. Half the regulars used to post, "Just pick this up." Now they post, "Finally sold my last piece" to help cover the move. Same forum, same people, mostly. Different year and a completely different tone. 2 economies, 1 shared name on the dial. Now put a real person back inside the one that is disappearing and watch what the decision actually costs her. The human cost. Go back to the Tudor buyer. She did not lose her job. She did not take a pay cut. Nothing dramatic happened to her personally this year, and that is exactly why the story is unsettling instead of tragic. Her rent went up by an amount that, on its own, looks almost reasonable on a spreadsheet, $410. That is the entire plot, and that is the part that should bother you. Nothing went wrong except the ordinary cost of staying in the same apartment one more year. She ran the numbers the way a careful person runs them. Groceries had already crept up over the previous 2 years without her fully registering it happening. The way prices climb when they rise a little every month instead of all at once, in a way you would actually notice. Her car insurance renewed at a higher rate that same spring, unrelated, just bad timing stacking on top of worse timing. None of these individually made a headline. Together, they built a wall she did not see coming until she was standing directly in front of it. The watch fund was not dramatic to close, either. She did not post about it. She did not frame it as a sacrifice or a lesson for anyone else. She moved $62 back into checking on an ordinary Tuesday evening and kept scrolling her phone like nothing had happened, because to her, in that specific moment, nothing had. The detail that actually stays with me longer than any of the percentages is smaller than all of them. She still has the browser bookmark. A specific Tudor Black Bay listing from an authorized dealer, saved 11 months ago, still sitting quietly in her folder. She has not deleted it. She just does not open it anymore, and some part of her seems to already know exactly why. She still checks the occasional watch post when it crosses her feed, out of habit more than intention, the way you keep glancing at a door you used to walk through every day. She has started following a couple of secondhand furniture accounts instead, because that budget line still has some give in it. For now. It is a smaller version of the same instinct. Something to want, something to save toward, something that costs less than the version she actually wanted first. Nobody at Tudor made a decision about her specifically, and nobody ever will, because a decision like that never gets made by one person in one room. But the price increase that landed in January, stacked on top of the rent increase that landed in March, closed a door that both companies will insist, separately and with total sincerity, that they had nothing to do with closing. Has a fee, a rent hike, or a bill quietly ended a savings goal of yours? Right now, a 100-year-old industry quietly decided its next customer would not be the average person. Why this one doesn't bounce back? Every collector who has been around long enough will tell you the hobby has survived downturns before. 2008 scared everyone for a year. Then boutiques reopened and wait lists came back, longer than ever. 2020 shut the doors for a few months. Then the secondary market went so hot that watches were trading above retail within weeks of stores reopening. Both of those were shocks. Sharp, frightening, and temporary. The floor dropped, and then the floor came back, because the underlying paychecks underneath it hadn't actually changed shape. This one is built differently, and that is the part nobody wants to say into a camera. 2008 was a credit event. 2020 was a supply shock. What's happening now isn't an event at all. It is 6 consecutive years of the cushion between wages and the cost of living thinning out, 1/10 of a percentage point at a time, until barely positive started to look like the new normal instead of a warning sign. You cannot wait out a margin that thin, the way you waited out a recession. There is no reopening on the other side of it, because there was no single door that closed. That is the distinction that should worry anyone hoping this fixes itself in 18 months, the way it did twice before. A recession ends because credit loosens or supply catches up. A structural wage-to-cost gap does not end on its own. It ends only if wages actually close the distance. And nothing in the last 6 years of data suggests that is close to happening. Nothing in the current wage data even hints at a correction on the horizon, which is the detail most people skip past too quickly. Which means the buyer who dropped out this year is not on pause, waiting for the market to reopen. There is a version of this argument that says markets always find a new equilibrium eventually, that some future wage catch-up will reopen the door the same way it always has. Maybe, but every year that argument gets pushed further out is another year a specific person turns 30 or 35, having never gotten to make the purchase that was supposed to mark the milestone, and no future equilibrium gives that particular year back to her. Ask a veteran authorized dealer employee whether they expect the old walk-in traffic to come back once things settle down. And most will hesitate before answering because they have started to suspect the honest answer is no. Not because people stopped wanting watches, because the specific financial conditions that used to produce a first-time buyer, conditions that held reasonably steady for decades, changed underneath the entire industry at once, and nobody built a plan for what happens if they do not change back. If the gap does not close on its own, the only question left is who decides what closes instead. What survives? So is the watch market collapsing? No, it is worse. It is sorting. The brands that come out ahead of this period will not be the ones that made watches more people could afford. They will be the ones that figured out how to stay worth wanting to the exact number of people who still can afford them. That is not failure dressed up as strategy. It is an actual strategy, executed on purpose, by an industry that ran the same household numbers you just heard and decided that it could survive without the customer, who could no longer clear them. It survives the way a filter survives, by getting narrower, on purpose, until only what fits keeps moving through it. The industry did not plan for this squeeze, but once it arrived, it did not fight the squeeze either. It adjusted the door, quietly, and kept walking people through at the new size. And here is the harder truth, sitting underneath all of it. The watches did not get more expensive because they got better. They got more expensive because the industry needed fewer people to say yes at a higher price, to keep the same total number working on the balance sheet. That is not only an accident of tariffs or gold prices, though both are part of the picture. It is a business absorbing a shrinking customer base and adjusting the price until the math worked again on whoever was left standing in the room. If you have ever closed a savings tab and told yourself you would come back to it later, you already know exactly what this whole thing has been about. That instinct was not weakness. It was you doing the math correctly, faster than most industry analysts manage to. Which one wins in your budget right now, honestly? The watch or the rent increase? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe.